But now it's back to golf for the U.S. president. He's wrapping up his 5-day visit to Scotland today by meeting the country's first minister and attending the opening of a new Trump golf course. It's been a busy trip for the U.S. president, with Trump meeting UK Prime Minister Keir Stamer. He also weighed in on what he called real starvation in Gaza and Russia's war on Ukraine, as we just heard. On Sunday, he signed a major new trade deal with the EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. The agreement slaps a 15% tariff on goods entering the United States coming from the EU. And that trade deal has received a lukewarm response from some EU member states. For more, we can cross over to Brussels, where our correspondent Christine Mundwa is standing by for us. Christine, what are the critics of this deal saying?
Well, lukewarm is a very nice way of putting it, Nicole, in terms of the criticism that this deal has gotten from quarters here in the European Union. I mean, you've got some people saying that the one side got a deal and the other got a bill, because what this deal does is it sees the European Union paying a 15% baseline tariff on its exports to the United States. In exchange, the US gets more access to the EU market, and it's pretty much made no concessions for that, potentially more revenue as well for the United States. And so people are saying, what if it's not surrender or capitulation? On top of that, Brussels promises to ramp up investment in the United States to the tune of 600 billion euros, and then a promise to buy more energy from the United States to the tune of 750 billion over the next 3 years. So it is really looking like Brussels did surrender to the United States. And just given where we were at the start of negotiations, Brussels was initially offering 0 for 0 tariffs. And then at some point, it looked like they were going to land on 0 for 10% tariffs, with some exceptions for certain sectors like cars, for example. Then came that weekend letter from the US president threatening a 30% tariff if there was no deal reached by the 1st of August. So here is where we are today. Huge criticism coming from a number of quarters on this deal with the United States.
This was negotiated by the European Commission. What are they saying in defense of the deal?
Well, the Commission President says that the alternatives were not better, right? I talked about that 30% threat that the US President threatened by 1st of August. This would have been in a few days from now. And the current tariff level is at about 27.5%. So 15% does seem like the better option. Then there's also the practical reality that Brussels just cannot afford a trade war with the United States for both economic and political reasons, right? Brussels right now needs to keep Washington on board when it pertains to staying the course for support for Ukraine. And so you saw the Commission consistently extend the olive branch throughout these negotiations, even when you could see that the United States perhaps wasn't negotiating in a goodwill manner. You saw the Commission repeatedly soften its approach, opting not to impose retaliatory measures. And critics like in France, chief among them the French President Emmanuel Macron, was saying that Brussels should have been tougher from the very start, should have been more open to imposing retaliatory tariffs. But this is where we are today. The Commission saying there was no better deal, this was the option, and the uncertainty was bad for businesses on both sides of the Atlantic, but it's certainly for this side of the Atlantic. And we see, for instance, in Berlin, the German Chancellor saying this is good for an export-oriented economy like Germany, because that uncertainty over ongoing negotiations is taken off the table now.
Briefly, can you tell us if there is a chance that the detractors could still derail this deal?
Well, Nicole, that's a very interesting aspect, because there are questions about the legality of this, right? So you've got to look at the concessions that the European Union has made. And once the dust settles and we have more clarity about what's really in this deal, we'll understand whether or not these concessions are in line with the WTO's trading rules. Because if the United States has now been given some sort of preferential access to the EU market, you're violating international trade laws. So you might have the legal aspect of that. But then there's also the practicality factor, right? Does the European Union or EU member countries really have the scope to ramp up energy imports from the US by 750 billion euros over the next 3 years? Also, the Commission cannot guarantee that 650 billion of investment into the United States, because that's not public spending, that is private sector spending, which the EU Commission does not have control over. So it'll be interesting to see how practically this deal will come out in the end, given the opposition.
A deal on the table, but many questions remain. That was DW correspondent Christine Mundwa in Brussels. Thanks so much.